me where you are. Okay, good. But hurry, will you please? Because these models are giving me a headache.
10 minutes!
Became terribly interested in the molecular structure of water and what affects it. Now, water is the most receptive of the 4 elements. Mr. Emoto thought perhaps it would respond to non-physical events. So he set up a series of studies, applied mental stimuli, and photographed it with a microscope.
For one sample of water, we drop about 0.5 cc's onto each 50 petri dishes. Then we take those 50 petri dishes and freeze them in a freezer at minus 25 degrees Celsius for about 3 hours. We take those frozen samples into a refrigerator that is set at minus 5 degrees Celsius, where a microscope with a camera is set up. There we take photographs of each of the 50 water drops individually. We first take photographs of water that we did not put any information in. Then we take the water with information and do the same procedure just described. We take those before and after photographs and compare the differences. When we projected the feeling of love and thanks to water, it made the most beautiful crystal. At times like this, I think water is at peace.
This first picture is a picture of water from the Fujiwara Dam. And this picture is the same water after receiving a blessing from a Zen Buddhist monk. Now, in this next series of pictures, Mr. Emoto printed out words, taped them to bottles of distilled water, and left them out overnight. This first photograph is a picture of the pure distilled water, just the essence of itself. These subsequent photographs, as you can see, are each different. This is the chi of love. And we move along here to thank you. And you can see where he taped that to this bottle here. But if you read Japanese, you already knew that. Now, Mr. Emoto speaks of the thought or intent being the driving force in all of this. The science of how that actually affects the molecules is unknown, except to the water molecules, of course. And it's really fascinating when you keep in mind that 90% of our bodies are water.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? If thoughts can do that to water, imagine what our thoughts can do to us.
Recently, there was the huge tsunami that happened in the ocean, and you wrote that the prayer for that. That was great. Thank you. I've noticed that when something like that happens, it seems like people from around the world, suddenly there's this outpouring of support and help. There's something about helping on the world level that seems to uplift everyone. What do you make of that?
やはりその過去もう10年ぐらいの間にいろんなところで実験をして
Through my 10 years of research, I have been visually sending the message to people all over the world that people's prayers and thoughts can affect reality no matter where they are.
皆さんに届けられています。でそういうような
So because this idea had already been accepted by many in the world, people probably thought, oh, so that's how it works. If we try, our energy can reach there. Then we should all pray.
祈ろうというようなことになったんではないかと思いますね。そしてまたそれが今
And this is the reason why there are no great outbreaks of infectious disease as a result of the tsunami disaster.
こういうような積み重ねによってやはり人々はもう
With the repetition of similar actions, people may start regaining faith in prayers.
していくようになるんではないだろうか。従いまして
Therefore, in other words, there may be more disasters, be it natural or man-made, that would create more casualties along the way.
的にも襲ってくるでしょうけれども、いろいろな人たちが
Through these experiences, more people may be able to perceive these problems as their own, that they are all responsible as well.
自分のこととして考えるようになっていくんではないだろうかというふうに思います。
We really learn to love that these particular problems of separateness would just disappear, like a filmy mist when the morning sun comes about.
So we do the O.J. Simpson thing, and we have an amazing result. A number of years go by, and more of us are getting interested in this thing, this kind of idea of taking random number generators and seeing whether we can detect the world reacting to it. So an unhappy event occurred where Princess Di died in an accident. And somewhat similar to the O.J. thing, everyone knew a week in advance that there was going to be a live broadcast of the funeral. And this was such a shock around the world that we knew that it would probably attract something like 1 billion viewers live. So in this case, we had 12 colleagues, each of whom had a similar kind of random number generator around the world. And we all got together and recorded data before, during, and after the funeral. And came up with a formal test to see whether or not there was a deviation in the generators. And as it turned out, there was a significant deviation among all of these generators around the world. Another year or so goes by, and we start thinking, these one-shot experiments are interesting, but we're going to miss things that happen spontaneously. Like, it would have been interesting to know what would have happened when the first news broadcast went out that Princess Di had died. So this generated the notion of the Global Consciousness Project, which is headed by Roger Nelson at Princeton. And the idea is to take random number generators, locate them around the world, run them 24 hours a day, and every 5 minutes send all the data up to a single web server at Princeton. So we have a continuous record, and we've had it now for 8 years, a continuous record of randomness from around the world. We have data now for 2 kinds of events. 2 basic types of events. We have planned events like Y2K. It was, again, a stroke of midnight where everyone was going to be paying attention in each time zone. We also have spontaneous events like 9/11 that weren't planned. But we're able to look at all of them now in terms of what happened to this randomness, this physical measure of randomness around the world, when a lot of minds suddenly became focused on something. And the short story of this is that we have hundreds of events now, both planned and unplanned, and it is very clear that overall the randomness is not as random as it ought to be, by theory, when these events are occurring. Large-scale events that attract a lot of attention create a certain mental coherence, which seems to be reflected in what's going on in random generators around the world. So that's one thing of interest. The second thing of interest is, and we noticed this first when 9/11 occurred. We analyzed it very closely to see what was happening. There were 37 random generators running that day. If you go into the data and you look at it over the course of the day, 9/11, you find a very unusual statistical structure in the data. You find a 6 standard deviation change. It's as though, if you think about the results of this experiment like a bell shape, we're constantly recreating a bell-shaped curve. That's what the statistics look like. And we're interested in, how does the bell ring? How does it swing? How does it vibrate over time? That's the way that a way of thinking about the statistic. On 9/11, the bell rang extremely loud. It swung hard in one direction and it swung hard in the other direction, basically. And then we thought, well, that's unusual. So we compared it to other days. We started comparing it to more and more days around 9/11, and it turns out that 9/11, within the year 2001, was the loudest ringing of the bell. Well, it was probably also the most focused day of attention for 2001 and maybe since then. The other thing that was interesting is that the bell started to swing before 8:30 in the morning Eastern Time. It began to swing noticeably before the events unfolded, which suggested something like a premonition. There was something beginning to build statistically that then basically exploded at when the events unraveled, but something was a premonition.
One of the most interesting experiments with random event generators occurred when it was really out of time. Some of the Princeton investigators and some of the other ones decided that they would try to see whether or not you could affect a random machine after it had run. So they converted it, instead of having a computer with a visual screen, they had a computerized situation that was audio tapes. And they had it with clicks in the left ear and clicks in the right ear. And they already played this with nobody listening to it, so that it already ran. They put that in a vault, and they then gave the tape, the already run tape, to a participant and said, take it home, I want you to listen to it, and I want you to make more left ear clicks than right ear clicks with it. Send your intention to it. So the person did. They handed back the tape, and they played it, and lo and behold, and they played the one in the vault too, and they discovered that they were both the same, and they both had more left clicks than right clicks. So what was going on here? Well, it wasn't as though the person who was the participant had actually affected it at the moment he was listening to it. His thoughts and his attention had moved back down the timeline and affected it at the moment it was generated.